Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and this short video we're going to discuss events that took place during the previous 12 hours. The Russians made another massive missile attack all over the entire Ukraine. For these purposes, the Russians were using three strategical launches area. The first one is located in Murmansk. For these purposes, the Russians were using Tu-95 strategical bombers. The second launches area is Caspian Sea, this one. For these purposes, the Russians were using 160 to 160 strategical bombers. And the second area that the Russians were using to attack Ukraine with missiles was the Black Sea. And for those purposes, the Russians were using their submarines and the ships that are able to carry missiles and rockets. As a result of those attacks, there were a lot of explosions all over the entire Ukraine. The sources published video and photo confirmations of explosions in Kiev, in Kharkiv, in Dnipro and Pavlograd. But the most important and fierce explosions we can find in Pavlograd, in this town. There were a lot of video and photo confirmation of those explosions. And some sources are saying that as a result of detonation of attack, the Ukrainians lost another warehouse ammo depot. Some sources are saying that Ukrainians lost another ammo of missiles and rockets for S-300 system, for air defense system. And other sources are saying that there was attack against the Ukrainian manpower of their brigades and forces in this area. For now, it is very difficult to determine and to understand what exactly the Ukrainians lost during that attack. I believe that the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation is going to include this piece of information in the next update. But before that, let's try to analyze and let's try to understand what is the value of Pavlograd and what kind of damage the Russians could deal as a result of that attack. For these purposes, let's return back to the Western sources map. And first of all, we need to understand one important thing. When talking about the combat line, and I'm talking about the combat line between Dnipro and Seversky Donetsk River, there are three support and supply endpoints in this area. The first supply endpoint is Orekhov-Gulyai-Polye supply support endpoint. What does it mean endpoint? This is the area where the Ukrainians are able to move their armored vehicles, their tanks, support, supply, shells, munition using the railroad stations. The second support endpoint is Pokrovsk, this town that located on the west-north from Avdiivka, on the west from Avdiivka. So using this endpoint, Ukrainians are able to support their forces in Kurakhovo, Ugledar, Velika Novoselovka, Avdiivka, and so on. And the last support endpoint in this area is Slaviansk-Kramatorsk endpoint. Using this endpoint, the Ukrainians are able to support and bring munition, shells, manpower to the Ukrainians who are currently defending Bakhmut, Konstantinovka, Seversk, and so on. So three supplies endpoint. And to bring munition, to bring support to these endpoints, the Ukrainians can use just the most effective way is to use the railroad ways. For example, when talking Slaviansk-Kramatorsk, there is one railroad that goes through Barvenkovo, Lazova, and then the final endpoint in this area we can say is Pavlograd. For example, when talking about Pokrovsk, let's say the area that stands against and supports Avdiivka battle, to get supply in this direction, the Ukrainians can use few roads, and one of them goes through Pokrovsk to Pavlograd as well. So as you can see, currently at least two endpoints, supply endpoints, are completely depends on Pavlograd logistic hub. The last support endpoint that goes to Orekhov and Gulyai-Polye is going through, let's say, the town by the name of Sinelnikovo, this one, and both sides. And Orekhov goes through Zaporozhye and Sinelnikovo as well. But if we take a look at this map, we see that there is a strict connection between these two supply endpoints, like Pavlograd and Sinelnikovo. And of course, if the Ukrainians want to move their forces somewhere from Kharkiv or from the north of Ukraine, using Pavlograd, then they need to go through Pavlograd, through Dnipro, through Lazova, and then to go to Sinelnikovo, and after that the forces will reach Orekhov-Gulyai-Polye endpoint. So we understand that from this perspective, I believe, this is my speculation and this is my projection, just based on experience I have. So I suppose and I believe that around 50% of entire support, of entire logistic goes through this endpoint, the beginning endpoint by the name of Pavlograd, through this area. And by that attack, I believe that the Russians managed to destroy either the Ukrainian manpower and S-300 rockets and shells, munition, and so on. Now, I would like to remind you one more time the events that we discussed during my previous video. If you remember, yesterday the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of missile attack against Kramatorsk, the Russians managed to destroy up to 200 tons of shells and munition. Furthermore, the Russians reported that as a result against Konstantinovka, they managed to destroy the position of 24th Mechanized Brigade, and as a result of that attack, 200 soldiers were killed and around 280 soldiers were wounded and were evacuated from the combat line. And I told you in the previous video saying that currently the Ukrainians have already redeployed in this area, according to the Ukrainian sources, up to 80,000 soldiers, and this is a very big army. And if you want this army to be able to fight, to stand against the Russians, you need to bring endless and significant number of ammunition and shells to the combat line if you want to be effective, and if you want, let's say, even to start and block an operation of Bakhmut, which nobody believes that Ukrainians are going to start. And to do this, the best solution, the best way is to use the railroad station, because you need to bring a lot of tons of munition and shells, you need to bring parts, more vehicles, and so on. And that was the first attack, and I told you, as we discussed, that possibly, as according to the situation I see, Ukrainians in this area, this 80,000 army, has lack of munition, and this may be the only reason why the Ukrainians still haven't launched any counter-offensive operation, because they don't have, simply say, they don't have bullets to use to shoot the enemy. They don't have shells that can they use for their artillery. They have some reserves, but to launch counter-offensive operations when you need to increase the number of usages of shells like in many times, they don't have such resources. And I was expecting yesterday that soon we're going to see the development of the situation, and right exactly after I published this video, we start receiving updates that the Russians managed to attack Pavlograd with missiles and more ammo depots were destroyed. So currently I see that, now I must say that, and I see that not just the forces in Slavyansk Kramatorsk has lack of manpower and munition shells. Currently the entire endpoints, like combat endpoints like Orekho, Guliapole, Pokrovsk and Kramatorsk, Slavyansk will have some kind of lack of munition. And the Russians will continue attacking these two towns, Pavlograd and Sinkovka, and they will force the Ukrainians to use the local roads for transferring the supply and support using the regular trucks. Of course, it will reduce the effectiveness and it will increase the logistic issues for the Ukrainians, but for now I see that this is the only possible solution for them. Furthermore, don't forget, another important thing is that yesterday we discussed that yesterday was the first day, according to the local time, was the first day when the Ukrainians mentioned about the redeployment to the combat line of the first newly created brigade, and we're talking about 116 mechanized brigade. And that was the first sign, and I told you that this is not enough to tell that the Ukrainians launched their counter-offensive operation, and we discussed that as soon as we receive more updates about the redeployment of the newly created brigade to the combat line, only then we can say that Ukrainians are going to launch their counter-offensive operation, and possibly the Russians, by missile attack against Pavlograd, destroy another convoy of some newly created brigades that Ukrainians were planning to redeploy to the south or to Avdiivka and so on. For these purposes, let's take a look at the Russian deployment sources map. As you can see, this is Pavlograd, this one Pavlograd, and the newly created brigades, according to this map, is located in Poltava. In this area, there is 116th mechanized brigade, as we discussed yesterday. The first mentioning of the redeployment of this brigade were spotted in Ukraine 31st mechanized brigade, and there is a 32nd mechanized brigade. And if we take a look at the deployment map, this is Poltava. There are few possible solutions how to get forces from Poltava, but anyway, this is Poltava on the north, let's say. And if the Ukrainians want to redeploy forces, newly created brigade from Poltava to the south, anyway, they're going to use railroad ways for these purposes to speed up, increase the, and to speed up this process. And anyway, all the roads and all the railroads go through these two towns, Pavlograd or Sinkovka, through these two areas. So I believe and I assume And possibly during the previous night, the Ukrainians were trying to redeploy some newly created brigades to the south using this railroad logistic hub, but the Russians attacked this area as well. Furthermore, if we take a look at the western deployment map, then in this area, in this map, we can see that these newly created brigades are located not in Poltava, but exactly in the vicinity of Pavlograd, a little bit to the north in this area. And there are 88th Mechanized Brigade, there is a 33rd Mechanized Brigade, 13th Jaeger Brigade, 116th Brigade. So as you can see, a little bit some differences between maps, but anyway, they shows the real direction. And 47th Mechanized Brigade. So I assume that during the previous night, the Ukrainians were trying to launch, or at least to redeploy a significant number of forces using these Pavlograd, Sinkovka, Dnipro logistic hubs, and the Russians discovered and spotted this operation from the Ukrainian side and made a massive missile attack. And as a result of those attacks, the Ukrainians lost some number of armored forces, of manpower. They lost a lot of ammo depots in this area because the explosions was like as a result of detonation of some shells, and some sources are saying, we will also include this, that Ukrainians lost a few missiles, a number of missiles of 300 air defense system, because some experts, military experts, are saying that explosions and the sounds of explosions looked like the explosions of S-300 missiles. So that was significant, powerful attack against the Ukrainian forces that could lead to collapse of entire front line that located along the combat endpoints. A very interesting update, the last one I would like to discuss with you, is coming from Bakhmut. For example, yesterday the Wagners published video of the warehouses that located underground in the underground basements of Solidar, and we discussed that there are a lot of basements, and the level of the basements is around 150 meters under the ground, and they published a lot of endless like tunnels and endless facilities with ammo and shells, and the Ukrainians were trying during the retreating process from Solidar to destroy them, but they couldn't do this, and currently all this weapon belongs to the Russian forces and the forces of Wagner's. And that's it for this short video. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.